Hey guys, iKailaKai here, sorry to catch you at night. I'm going to answer the question that you have on your mind. Why am I in a tree? I'm going to answer the second question that's on your mind. What are the new strong leaders in OP14? Well, in this video, I'm going to talk about every single OP14 leader that's been released, including the bad ones, which honestly there aren't that many, and explain exactly where they stack up against the OP13 meta that we had, so that if you're a bit bored of the mundane OP13 meta where there's two extremely powerful decks, you at least have something to practice and look forward to in OP14. Took me a little while to climb down, but thank you for watching. As always, make sure to like and subscribe. Even if you don't actually use your subscription feed, it helps me out, lets me know that I'm doing well. My email guide on Metafy is also 25% off if you use this code on the screen right now, so make sure to check that out if you're curious about getting that. I'm going to start updating for OP14. Thank you as always for supporting my content. Let's get into the video. Sorry about that slightly horrifying intro. It was a little bit darker than I expected outside, but instead of focusing on the darkness, let's look at the light at the end of the tunnel, and that is OP14. Not only is the first time that we've gotten 7 leaders within the same set, they are all representing the 7 warlords of the sea. 6 plus law. And fittingly, because it's actually 6 plus law, the 6 leaders that are not law, I believe, are actually competitively viable within this meta. So when it comes to OP14 leaders, it's not only just if the leader can be powerful, because frankly, a lot of leaders are really powerful. It's how they stack up against this predetermined best 3 decks in Zoro, Ima, and Ace. First, of course, we have Ima, and Ima actually seems to be a leader that's more popular in the West compared to the East. Whether it's a difference in playstyle or, as I've heard, best of 3 rules making it advantageous for Ima players, Ima tends to be the premier pick for OP13 if you are trying to win. While Zoro and Ace tech lists generally haven't changed all too much, just changing a couple of tech cards to combat the new meta, Ima has actually received some buffs in the new 1-cost Ground Death. Ground Death is a 1-cost event, which importantly means that it can actually be used within the Ima deck, but if you were to rest 2 extra dong on the main effect, costing 3 in total, then you can negate the effect of a 5-cost or less for the rest of the turn. Then on counter, if you have 10 or more cards within your trash, then your leader or one of your characters gains plus 4,000 power for that battle. Now the counter effect is very powerful for Ima, of course, because it's very easy to meet this condition of 10 cards in trash. However, the biggest strength in this card is the main effect. Being able to negate a 5-cost or less on the board is actually stronger than it seems in OP14. Previously, with this sort of effect, you would have been able to get over the opponent's 4-cost Marco on the final turn, over the opponent's Warcure, but there weren't too many other cards that you really wanted to negate. However, in OP14, there are a couple of cards that have been printed as answers to Ima that, in a weird way, Banda has also printed answers to within Ima. These cards are the 5-cost Tashigi and the 5-cost Virgo. Now, let me move over for these cards on the screen. These cards have innate removal protection, which makes it very difficult for Ima to use Mars. And Mars not being able to KO these cards means that they stick on the board. And then if, for example, Purple Doflamingo can play the 8-cost Doflamingo into the 5-cost Virgo, or Mihawk can start to ramp up the pressure with this 5-cost 8,000 unmovable Tashigi, then you can really start to get a lot of damage onto Ima that you wouldn't historically have been able to with any sort of other card within this game. However, because Ima now has access to Ground Death, you can now negate the effect, making it so that it no longer has that protection, and then KO it with Mars anyways, therefore giving you a counter to the opponent's counter, but it's still costing 3 cards in your hand. The fact that this card has plus 4k counter that can go to your characters and your leader, as well as having such a powerful main effect, is why I think this card is now a 4 within the Ima deck list. Still, while Ima has received some buffs within this meta, there are a lot of new leaders that seem to have been, as we have mentioned with this Tashigi and Virgo, specifically designed to counter Ima. So let's look at some of those, starting with the highest play rate deck currently, Mihawk. Mihawk is a green leader, which if the opponent has the slash attribute, he himself gains plus 1,000 power. This is during your turn as well as the opponent's turn. Then on activate main, once per turn, you may rest one of your cards. And if there's a character with a cost of 5 or more, you can set up to 3 of your Dong cards as active, and then you cannot play a character card for the rest of the turn. Mihawk's leader effect on paper is rather underwhelming when compared to the likes of Green Zoro or Red Green Smoker. However, with this extra dong, although you can't play any more characters, you can still, of course, attach that dong to characters, use the dong for effects of other characters, play down your stage, or even leave up dong for counter events. Because it just needs to be one of your cards, it just needs to be any card that you have on your board. It can be one of your cards like the 1-cost Peron on the board, it could be your stage, or it can even be another one of your dong cards or your leader, for example. The general game plan for Mihawk is to try to play on curve as best as possible, playing out very powerful cards like the 5-cost Tashigi and eventually the 7-cost Shanks and 9-cost Mihawk to start to overwhelm your opponent, trigger some extremely high value effects when they become rested. Now this is a somewhat new concept in this game, but essentially what this means is that with your leader effect, if you were to force the card rested, you get this effect. And when you were to attack, because you need to rest your card to attack into the opponent, you also get this effect, meaning that effectively you can kind of rewrite this as if your leader is Mihawk, then you get this effect on play and on attack. After your 7 dong turn, on 9 dong you can play the 9 cost Mihawk, the new secret rare of OP14, which when rested on your turn makes it that one of the opponent's characters that costs 9 or less cannot be rested until the next turn. Now, not being able to be rested makes some things very tricky within the mirror especially, but also for a lot of these other matchups, it simply means that you just can't block with that character, nor can you attack. Lastly, after rounding out your early game curve with all of these new cards, you can then finish off the game with one of these old cards, well, relatively old, in Law and Beppo. Law and Beppo, alongside things like the 7 cost Shanks and the 9 cost Mihawk, make it so it's very difficult for the opponent to actually get enough attacks to make it over you. Not only this, but because after you play Law and Beppo, you can simply rest him or your stage or any card for your leader effect to then get 3 dong up. It's very easy to become a 7,000 power leader while the opponent's board is reduced in power, and you have a bunch of counter events at your disposal, making it very tricky for the opponent to actually close out the game if you get to this stage. Mihawk in essence is a very simple deck to play, but has a lot of very interesting intricacies in the way that his leader effect interacts with the cards that he specifically has. The main thing holding back this leader, of course, is its consistency, as currently most lists only run the 1 cost Pirona as the only searcher to search out the cards within your deck. If you simply don't find this Pirona, you're just playing top deck to top deck on a deck that really wants to play on curve. It's for this reason that some people have been playing the East Blue Searcher to help find the 7 cost Shanks, and more commonly some people have been running the 2 cost Kitten Killer and focus more on a Supernova package. While 7 cost Shanks is very strong, it's specifically good into Emu and not necessarily something that you really want to be playing on curve every single time. Lon Beppo, on the other hand, is just a very solid late game card for this deck, so therefore increasing the searchability of this card by not only having the 1 cost Pirona but also the 2 cost Kitten Killer to find it has been a lot of people's preference, even to the point of cutting out the 7 cost Shanks in some points. But honestly, I don't really know how they're beating Ima. Now, this Supernova-focused Mihawk build tends to run things like the 5-cost Bonnie, which can be very powerful into some matchups like Red-Blue Ace to deny the opponent playing the 8-cost event on that 8-dong turn. It's also very good in the Mirror to deny the opponent the ability to play on curve. Still, with the list that I presented, I personally like this list a lot because it utilizes the leader effect to its maximum potential, just making it very difficult to actually break through Mihawk, which I found has been the easiest way to actually get over the power that this deck can potentially have. Mihawk fundamentally has the tools to be able to deal with Ima and the power to get over a deck like Ace as well, just by hitting 8,000 every single turn with the restanded dong that you have from your leader effect. And it's for this reason that Mihawk's play rate has been really high, especially in Japan in the early weeks. However, this isn't to necessarily say that the Ima and Ace matchups are actually favored for Mihawk, because these matchups, I believe, with a very good Ace or Ima pilot can actually start to sway in the other direction, depending on the build and the play, of course. And as people have started to figure out the Mihawk matchup a little bit more, although he is still very powerful, his play rate has started to come down. Not only is it the Emu players and Ace players starting to figure out the matchup more, but also some people are playing decks that specifically beat Mihawk, like one of the other new leaders, Purple Doflamingo. Purple Doflamingo is a deck that I find very fascinating because not only is it a deck that really wasn't that popular in the first couple of days in Japan, but slowly came up in play rate, it's also a deck that people just in general weren't that excited for in the East specifically. However, in the West, people were very, very excited for Doflamingo's potential. If parallels can be drawn between Mihawk and Roger, then I think that the equivalent to Purple Doflamingo from OP14 is Yellow NL. Doflamingo is a deck that to its core doesn't have that many very powerful cards that can be played to the board, but has exceptional survivability. With Doflamingo's lead effect, essentially if you were to -1 dong, then every single turn you can redirect one attack into something else. Not only does this mean that you're absorbing an attack that could potentially go into your leader into another character and slow down the game in that regard, it also means that you get very powerful on KO effects without the opponent's volition. Some good examples of this would be the 1 cost Linger, which of course is just a simple searcher, but you also have some really crazy on KO effects like Baby 5, which heals you 1 life, and if you played around the time that Blue Purple Luffy was popular, you know how powerful this can be, especially in a purple deck. Though Doflamingo doesn't have cards like Gungam Giant at his disposal, he has some cards like Nono Nono Beam Soldo, which alongside his lead effect as well as some really powerful on KO effects like this Baby 5, make it so it's very difficult to actually close out the game versus a deck like Doflamingo. Now the defensive capabilities that Doflamingo has as a deck is the reason to play this deck, so therefore we haven't really been looking at the offensive tools that he has quite yet. However, he does have some very powerful tools at his disposal in this regard as well. The 5-cost Virgo, as we mentioned in the EMA section, is extremely powerful because not only does he give himself removal protection, he gives your entire board, essentially in this deck, removal protection. This alongside having a great stat line being 5 cost 7000 power with a very powerful and versatile on attack effect as well that can be very annoying into some particularly difficult matchups like red blue ace makes it feel like this deck almost feels like purple Virgo, not purple Doflamingo. And although we have mentioned purple Doflamingo's capabilities to defend attacks that are going to his leader, we haven't actually mentioned the fact that he can also defend his characters extremely well as well. It's very difficult to actually starve out purple Doflamingo because if you are to try to attack into this Virgo and get rid of it because it is one of the strongest cards on the board that you don't really want to leave unchecked, the opponent can just redirect the attack into his leader instead. It's for this reason as well as other sorts of things like time constraints when it comes to Swiss format that makes it very difficult to actually starve out this deck, making it very difficult to actually know when you're supposed to be attacking and when you're supposed to be defending. This deck generally prefers to go second, playing a 4 cost, whether it's Baby 5 or Sugar on Fordong, any of the many 5 costs that are in the Doflamingo deck on the next turn, with Virgo being the strongest, 8 cost Doflamingo after that, with Virgo being the best target, and on the following turn having a lot of flexibility in your plays, whether it's spreading your board out more with another 8 cost Doflamingo, blocking the opponent's board with the 10 cost Doflamingo, specifically in the EMA matchup, or walling up with the really powerful on-KO effects as well as counter events. All in all, the deck is very powerful and very consistent thanks to the 3 searchers that it has at its disposal. The deck has a very solid matchup spread across the board, having a good matchup into both EMA as well as Mihawk in general, but suffers a little bit in the Ace matchup due to the fact that it's very difficult to actually get your attacks through when the opponent has 12,000 power blockers. With this all being said, I think that Purple Doflamingo is, in my opinion, a better deck than Green Mihawk at the very least, but not necessarily maybe one of the best decks, because I think one of the most annoying decks within this meta as a whole is Boa Hancock. Excuse me for a second while I vent my frustrations with Hancock. Hancock players, do you know what this is? Yeah, let me show you. It's grass. Wow, have you touched some of this before? Look at that. It's real grass. Why don't you touch it? Zoro players, NL players, I know that we've had our differences, but let's all unite for once and take down a necessary evil, Hancock. Hancock is one of the most frustrating leaders to fight against, in my opinion, at the very least. It's extremely hard to fight against Hancock because there's so many traps that the deck has. Hancock, like many recent leaders, has effectively 2 small leader effects. This is on the opponent's turn. If you were to play a character, you can draw 1 card. This can be off of on-KO effects that summon things like the 5-cost Nami, or it can also be off of your trigger effects as well, because this is also going to play a character on the opponent's turn. This means that you can play out a character while not going down in a hand size like a normal trigger would. The second part of the leader effect is if you have a Dong on your leader, then once per turn, if one of your Amazon Lily or Kuja Pirates type character with the power of 5,000 or greater is KO'd, then the opponent needs to add one of their life cards to their hand. Effectively, what this means is that it's very tricky to play against Hancock because you don't really want to be hitting into the opponent's life because they can trigger out some very, very powerful characters, which we'll get into very soon. But it's very difficult to actually take out the opponent's board as well because they can just as easily put you down to 0 and then use one of the most powerful game-ending combos within this entire game. Before we talk about some of these mid-game plays, because it can change from deck list to deck list, let's talk about the boss card in this deck, 9-cost Hancock. 9-cost Hancock is very familiar for people who have played Yellow Katakuri, and that is going to be the comparison dynamic for this leader. This leader is very reminiscent of Yellow Katakuri in that you can trigger your character out at any timing, and you have access to a pseudo 10-cost bomb that can just come out 1 turn faster and also has really good typing. The 9-cost Hancock, though it doesn't burn the opponent's life, coming out 1 turn faster if you're going first is very relevant in this slightly faster meta. Not only this, but because it is a warlord, it means that you can actually use the effect of Perfume Femur on it, meaning that if you were to get the opponent down to 0 life, which is extremely easy within the Hancock deck, you can very easily end the game with a 20,000 leader from Hancock on the following turn. Not only this, but you also have some flexibility in being able to play the Pudding first to reset the opponent's hand down to 5 and hit them for 16,000, which is in most instances guaranteed to go through on the opponent's leader. The main counterplay to this kind of play would be to just take the opponent out before you get rushed down. And while this would be good against most decks, Hancock with her lead effect and the insane trigger cards that are within this deck, like Gorgon Sisters, makes that very awkward as well. Gorgon Sisters alone off of your first life can be enough to close out some games because the activate main effect is so powerful. It's an effect that can be triggered over and over every turn, just gaining an insane amount of resources for free, letting you hit for very high power while making it very awkward for the opponent to take back your board because of the leader effect that you have at your disposal. It's for this reason that any trigger character, despite the low power that they may have, just being 5,000 power or more means that it's very awkward for the opponent to take out and very easy for you to keep mounting pressure. Because this video's taken so long to make, Hancock lists have actually changed, so let's look at the Osaka champion that won just yesterday as of the time of recording this. While traditionally many Hancock lists were running an insane amount of triggers or other types of interesting combos like the 5-cost Marigold to play out things like the 6-cost Hancock, the new type of Hancock build is to just play around your triggers while just stalling time for as long as possible through things like the 6-cost Kuma as well as the 1-cost You'll Frighten Me. Kuma, importantly being a warlord, is the reason why this deck runs the single searcher over the Nyomba searcher now, and has recently proven to be a very powerful tool, especially in the mirror, to get yourself out of perfume range, as honestly in the mirror you're going to be gambling a lot on your triggers. 6 cost Rayleigh, another very powerful card that can get rid of the opponent's characters, particularly things like the 6 cost Jozu in Ace's deck is very nice because they can't actually Jozu you back, like how the blue Doflamingo mirror historically played out in the past. And cards like the 4 cost Hancock, while having a very solid 4 cost 6000 power line, have a couple of different use cases in this deck. Not only is it a Kuja Pirate character that has blocker and 5000 or more power, which means that the opponent is forced to take their life should you block with this card at any point, but also reordering the top cards in your deck allows you to choose which triggers to add into your life, whether it's through the 6 cost Kuma or the 9 cost Hancock. Although there are very rarely timings you actually want to play out things like Gorgon Sisters directly out of hand, you do want to hold on to one in your hand because there are numerous triggers that can play cards directly out of your hand. Whether it's the 6 cost Promo Hancock or the 9 cost Hancock, you can very easily get Gorgon Sisters out. Depending on the deck that you're playing, you can try to starve or rush down Hancock. Still, the nature of this deck effectively guarantees that the opponent is forced to go down to 0 at some point, and the opposing player needs to be ready for that, whether it's just having enough counter or being able to close out the game before that actually happens. I think this is relatively okay for the health of the game because you can realistically prepare for this turn if you play well enough. However, if the opponent has Pudding, there really isn't too much you can do, so in conclusion, let's just ban Pudding and move on with it. And speaking of moving on with it, let's talk about the next leader, and another one that I actually think is very underrated, Crocodile. Crocodile is a deck that I think is vastly underrated within this meta, however is justifiably low in its play rate. I personally think that Crocodile beats all the leaders in OP14, however the red-blue ace matchup was just devastatingly difficult when I was trying to crack this deck, and unfortunately was the main reason why I decided not to bring Crocodile to my championship and instead brought Imu, as you saw in this video. However, the ace matchup isn't the only thing that's holding back this deck. Sometimes this deck can feel a little bit inconsistent, so I wouldn't be really confident bringing it into a 9-round tournament, but on top of this, it's an extremely difficult deck. It feels extremely unique and very different from any deck that we really have within this game, making it the only deck that I can't really make a comparison to another deck that already exists. Despite being a black leader, you cannot actually remove the opponent's characters from the board. However, on activate main once per turn, you may KO one of your characters with a type including Baroque Works, and then one of the opponent's character gets minus 10 cost, and you can trash up to 2 cards from the top of your deck. Now, like we mentioned with Purple Doflamingo being able to redirect the attacks into some of your cards to get the very strong on-KO effects, Crocodile can do this on his own turn with his own leader effect immediately when the card is played if he chooses to. Cards like the 4-cost Bunkley can be KO'd immediately on the turn that it's played, then reduce one of the opponent's characters to play out anything from the Mr. 5 to the Mr. 1 to immediately rest one of the characters and hit into it with Character Rush, for example. Effectively, Crocodile isn't necessarily a deck that uses this cost reduction in a traditional way, but uses it more as a way to activate his effects because a lot of his effects activate when the opponent has a 0 cost or an 8 cost on the board. Following up these early game plays with some really powerful cards like the 7 cost Miss All Sunday, which is effectively 8 cost Moria, but even stronger because it's 7 cost, and if you play out the 4 cost Bunkley, you could play out a 5 cost immediately, lets you develop an extremely powerful board very quickly within this deck. Then after that, playing an exceptionally powerful card within this deck, the 8 cost Crocodile, you can really start to overwhelm a lot of opponents. On play, being able to deny the opponent the ability to attack, and on KO being able to re-summon this card means that you can effectively play 8 cost Crocodile twice on the turn that he's played, locking 2 characters on the turn that he's played, and with your leader effect permanently locking a character for the rest of the game should you choose to. Because your leader effect reduces the opponent's cost by 10 and this does not affect base cost, you can lock anything as long as you leader effect first. Crocodile with these really powerful on-KO effects as well as really powerful payoffs in the 5 cost makes it not only very difficult to play this deck and pilot it correctly knowing when to actually KO your things versus when to just leave it on the board as attackers, but it's also very difficult to play against as well as you can start to feel like you're getting dried out as your resources and your options are taken away from you. However, due to the fact that Crocodile can't remove the opponent's characters, it means that the 10 cost Newgate from Ace is going to stay on the board permanently. And although you can deny the opponent the ability to attack with that character, you can't actually deny them the ability to block with it. This means that as the game goes on, although Crocodile is surviving for an exceptionally long time, he's not actually making very much progress, which is very similar to Purple Doflamingo. However, for Crocodile, this matchup is even harder because you don't have access to ramp, you don't have access to some cheeky ways to deal with the opponent's blockers like No Beam Solo. Still, I believe that if you do master this deck, I think you can be rewarded because many people are not really sure how to play against this deck, and this deck is extremely oppressive against the right types of deck. Though it is kind of like Red-Black Subtle in the way that it does one thing and one thing very well, that one thing that it does very well is extremely oppressive into so many decks. Due to the fact that this ace matchup is extremely difficult, many people have been taking in the 1-cost Patchwork, which works extremely well with your leader effect. After you reduce the cost of something like this 10-cost Newgate to 0 and they rest it to get the block off, unlike the 8-cost Crocodile, which denies the opponent from attacking with the character. It just is permanently locked, meaning that you have a full turn to be able to get some of your attacks in. While this isn't necessarily enough to actually make you win this matchup, it is something that'll absolutely help. And if you are planning to play Crocodile, you are bound to hit ace at some point, so it is a card that unfortunately you feel like you're forced to run. If this ace matchup is ever solved, whether it's innovations in deck building or simply new cards that are printed by Bandai, I can see this deck actually being really viable within this meta because it's so oppressive in the things that it can do very well. And that brings me to another deck that does something extremely well, but again falls to ace, and that is Jinbe. Jinbe is a deck that's exceptionally good at hitting at 5,000 power over and over. With the 1-cost Arlong and the 1-cost Jib being able to essentially pick up a card on play, Arlong being able to search for anything, effectively making him a stronger Garp in a sense, as well as the 1-cost Hachang being able to draw a card on KO, this deck loves to draw cards and trash them very quickly with your leader effect. Jinbe's leader effect is activate main, you may trash one card from your hand, and then you can give 2 Residong to one of your Fishmen or Merfolk type characters or leaders. Now, on paper, this seems like a objectively worse version of Red Yellow Bella Betty. However, Jinbe as a deck plays very differently from Bella Betty despite being in the same sort of burn aggro category. While Bella Betty has very few ways of actually gaining resources in hand aside from things like the 6-cost Koala, essentially all of Jinbe's relevant attackers have ways of redrawing cards. The 1-cost that we mentioned all have ways to draw you cards. The 3-cost Kurobi is essentially a parallel to the 3-cost Zoro. If you were to use your leader effect and attach Tudong onto this Kurobi, then you can hit for 5,000 power, and on KO you draw one card, effectively just getting back that card that you used for your leader effect. This 6-cost Fisher Tiger is a 6/7 with 1,000 counter, and on play, if your leader has the Fishman type, then you draw 3 cards. Then at the end of the turn, you have to trash cards until you get to 5 cards in hand. Because Jinbe's leader effect isn't actually once per turn, you can use your leader effect multiple times in one turn. Therefore, at the very worst, if you play this card with 5 cards in your hand already going up to 8, you can just use your leader effect 3 times immediately after that and essentially make this a 0-cost 7,000 and attach your Dong to anywhere you really like because this deck is functioning around these Merfolk and Fishmen. Spreading 2 Dong all around your 3,000 power characters and hitting at 5,000 power over and over again is going to very easily and quickly overwhelm a huge amount of these 5,000 power leaders in the meta. However, as we've mentioned, because your characters are 3,000 base power, attaching 2 Dong to them, making them 5,000, doesn't actually reach the opponent's leader if they're at 6,000 power. So therefore, the red-blue ace matchup is, once again, going to be quite difficult for this deck. Ace is just a deck that's very good at walling up and stalling a lot of time until you can eventually play out these 10-cost new gates that stall even more time for him to actually close out the game with the cards that he has in hand and on board. And Jinbe, although he has an insane amount of aggression because the opponent's leader is at 6,000 power, if he actually wants to hit the opponent's leader, he either has to attach 1 Dong physically or use his leader effect twice to hit at 7,000 power with these 3,000 power characters. With the 4-cost Aladdin or with the 4-cost Shirohoshi, these cards alone don't actually make enough damage to hit into the opponent's leader either because they have 5,000 base power, or in the case of Shirohoshi, 0. So if you want to hit into ace, you do have to use your leader effect, and Jinbe, while he does draw a lot of cards through his effects, can't use his leader effect that recklessly. Jinbe, like Crocodile, is an insanely difficult deck to master because I think the balance between knowing when to use your leader effect, when to go aggressive, and then when to just dump your hand, go for it, or play safe, gain these resources and play the slower game is very, very tricky, especially for this deck because it has so many options and so many ways that you can use your Dong in a single turn. This deck would be the equivalent of something like Red Zoro of old, just being able to hit at 5,000 very consistently over and over again. But you'll notice that in old Red Zoro decks, people didn't really run things that were too high in power, maybe things like 5-cost Luffy or 4-cost Kid Killer at the highest. However, this deck runs the 8-cost Jinbe, and though it may feel a little bit off theme with all of your attacks being at 5,000 and this card just coming down as a big 10,000 power rush, which is very easy to deal with if the opponent has a single blocker, this card actually plays a really crucial role in actually being able to rest your Dong. Because you can only attach rested Dong with your leader effect, to get the maximum value out of your leader effect, you actually need to be playing out characters that rest your Dong to then be able to attach it onto a leader or your characters. Therefore, this Jinbe essentially is not just an 8-cost 10,000 rush, but also a way of activating your leader effect 4 times should you choose to. If you use the on-play effect of Jinbe and rest 10 Dong, then not only do you draw 2 cards, also potentially getting rid of one of the opponent's blockers, but also give yourself 5 activations of your leader effect, making a crazy amount of damage that's going to go through on the opponent's leader. If for some reason this doesn't actually end up going through, because Jinbe is a warlord, you can just slap Perfume Femur on him and do something very akin to Hancock. And actually, unlike Hancock, because this card can just be used as an 8-cost 10,000 rush, on 10 Dong, you can actually play down this Jinbe for 8, use 2 Dong for Perfume Femur, and then use your leader effect 5 times to hit for 22,000 unblockable rush, which Oh my god. Because it's a blue aggro deck, he has a lot of ways of manipulating his resources in terms of card draw and card trashing to get lots of aggressive angles. And because it's blue, of course, you can run things like Pudding, which cannot be compared to any card in any other color, essentially. And while the ace matchup is difficult, Jinbe players have been putting in things like the 6-cost Red Rock to try to deal with the opponent's 10-cost New Gates and just give yourself enough time and enough damage to actually be able to get over the finish line. While this isn't necessarily enough to make the matchup winning and is a large factor of why Jinbe hasn't seen more success because of Ace's really high play rate, I think that Jinbe as a deck just being able to be really strong into generic 5,000 power leaders gives him enough merit to be played in a lot of circumstances. Nonetheless, let's move on to the second to last deck, and that is Moria, the greatest leader in OP14. And I, Dr. Hogback, will teach you exactly how to play this deck. The Great Black Yellow Moria has 2 leader effects because 1 is not enough for how powerful he is. Activate main once per turn, you can KO one of your own Thriller Bark Pirate type characters, and your leader, as well as your characters, gain plus 1000 power for the turn. Then, on attack, you can trash 3 cards and gain 1 life. Now, on paper, this leader feels a little bit weird, but of course, there's no way that Moria could actually be bad. And the core strength of this deck comes from the trigger cards. Now, basically, every single one of the new Thriller Bark Pirate cards have a trigger which plays a 4-cost Thriller Bark Pirate out of your trash rested. This means that essentially all you have to do is get a couple of good targets in your trash early on, and then when you trigger out a character, you can choose which card should come down to the field, and they are all very, very annoying to deal with. Whether it's through the 1-cost Tsunori-chan or just using your leader effect on the first turn that you can attack, you can dump a couple of cards into your trash and now set up for a world of pain and playing out cards normally, as well as if the opponent chooses to hit you, triggering out cards onto the board will give you a very wide board very quickly. And one of the strongest cards you can put onto the board is, of course, myself, the 4-cost Hogback. Now, this 4-cost Hogback is just a 4-cost 5,000, but on KO, you can play out a 4-cost card with trigger out of your trash. This makes the card very annoying for the opponent to actually deal with, and even if they don't deal with it, you can still get the on KO effect because you can use your leader effect to KO it anyways. Using this on KO effect to play out something like the 3-cost Absalom lets you effectively keep a character on the board while making your character 6,000 power, which does help a lot, specifically in the ace matchup, as we talked, was a big neck for a lot of these new leaders. Not only this, but because the 4-cost Hogback can play out any card that's triggered, not just Thriller Bark cards, things like the 4-cost Kikunojo are also quite annoying to put out because with your leader effect, they now become 7,000 power. And with the really annoying on-KO effect of Kikunojo, it makes it awkward for the opponent to make the decision of whether or not they want to take out this Kikunojo or let them hit you for 7,000 power every single turn. Absalom, my good friend, also has a great on-KO effect that is effectively just a search. And this deck, because you're really trying to get a lot of these 4-cost Hogbacks, the greatest character in this deck, onto the board, having lots of searches is really nice, which is why this deck uses so many. Now, actually, this is the first time that I've shown a Western list in one of my Eastern meta breakdowns, but I know that both Abster and Rede have been playing this deck a lot, and I really like the direction that they've taken this deck. Of course, a Moria faithful needs to recognize the other Moria faithfuls. So this deck can play and trigger out these really annoying 4-costs, but also you can just immediately play them out of your trash through not just the 6-cost Moria that came out in EB, but also the new 8-cost Moria. Now, 8-cost Moria can send a couple of shivers down your spine with how powerful our Lord and Savior once was. But the new 8-cost Moria does a couple of interesting, unique things that feel very Moria-like. Though it doesn't play 2 characters onto the board, arguably this card is stronger because not only does it have 10,000 power, but you can put the card into your life, meaning that the opponent is forced to hit into your most likely trigger card, and also, of course, you get to absorb a hit with your life. This, alongside your leader effect, effectively means that over the course of the game, you're probably going to have 6 to 7 life. It appears I forgot to turn on my light, but that's okay because Moria is used to the darkness. By the way, a little bit of context for why I'm dressed up as Hogback right now. A couple of months ago, I had a fundraiser for my girlfriend's dad who was fighting cancer. I have now done the Hogback cosplay, which was the most liked comment on the tweet that I made. I'll tell you how he's doing. Now, he is out of the hospital. He's doing well. He's going through therapy. Unfortunately, the doctor has said that he isn't likely to live for too many more years, but at the very least right now he is um he's healthy and he's smiling, and of course my girlfriend is happy as well to just have him at home. So thank you so much, because honestly medical bills can be very, very scary. You guys helped me a lot in the situation and took one massive burden off of their shoulders, so I appreciate it so, so much. And although this is the bare minimum for what I can do to repay you as a thanks, I really, really appreciate it. And maybe in a weird way, Moria and Dr. Hogback, as a doctor, is going to connect in some way to his full recovery to last longer than the doctor said that he will. But let's not let this section go on for too long. I really appreciate you guys for helping me out. Let's talk about another great card that this deck can run, and that is, of course, the 9-cost Hancock. Because your leader is a warlord, you can actually use the 9-cost Hancock. So with the 8-cost Moria and the 9-cost Hancock, you have 8 different ways to increase life on top of your leader effect, which just means that Moria has a lot of health, a lot of triggers, and a surprising amount of tankiness, which alongside his leader effect also equates to a lot of damage because he can just slowly chip away at the opponent over time with things like the 4-cost Hogback, 3-cost Absalom, and of course the 4-cost Perona just coming onto the board repeatedly over and over again, hitting at 5 or 6,000. Moria as a deck is very, very cool and plays around these triggers very well. And one thing that I actually want to point out about this Thriller Bark package is that none of the cards are actually leader locked. Even the 8-cost Moria, you just need to put a Thriller Bark type card into your life or your trash. So technically, you can play this package in other decks. I think that Purple Yellow Robin could use this well. The new Yellow Luffy could potentially use this quite well too. There's a lot of interesting decks that could potentially use this package, maybe not even in full, like Enel, for example, just having a couple of Thriller Bark cards that are relatively good to just have something to put into your life on this 8-cost 10,000 gives Yellow as a whole a lot of interesting versatility and something cool to think about in deck building because there are a lot of very strong Thriller Bark Pirate cards. And so while Moria hasn't necessarily seen the success that I think that he deserves quite yet, I think that he brings something good to the game that in the long run is going to make a lot of really cool decks. So this isn't to say that Moria is bad because I think that he maybe just hasn't found the right build or the right pilot quite yet, but I look forward to people leaving more results on this leader as I think that he does have a lot of really cool tools at his disposal. Anyways, that's all about our great Moria leader. Let's move on to the next one. That was a little bit weird. So anyways, let's talk about the final leader, I guess, and that is Red Law. Almost all of the other leaders have had some amount of success, with every single one of the new leaders except for Moria and Law making top cut in one of the last 3 Japanese OP14 championships. And while I do have faith that there is a stronger version of Moria out there that can actually break into the top meta potentially, Law, in my opinion, just feels like a bit of an awkward half-child of Red Rayleigh. Activate main once per turn, you can swap the base power of 2 of your Heart Pirates or Supernova type characters. This deck runs a very high number of low 1-cost characters, whether it's the new 1-cost Luffy Searcher SR or the old 1-cost Nami. These 1-cost characters, of course, have their on-play effect, which is generally just going to be the only use of a Searcher, but thanks to your leader effect, once you play out these higher power characters, such as the 5-cost X-Drake, the 7-cost Zoro, or the 9-cost Law, these Searchers can now hit for 7,000, 8,000, or 10,000 respectively. It's for this reason that while although maybe Red Law won't be hitting as many times as a deck like Jinbe will be, he will be hitting very, very hard. The strongest card within this deck is for sure going to be the 5-cost 7,000 X-Drake. This card, while having a vanilla stallion, which is going to be very important for your leader effect, just being able to get in these extra free 7,000 power attacks, also has board protection. But this board protection actually comes at a very big cost. While a lot of other cards have board protection almost unconditionally or at a very cheap cost, like flipping over your life card, going minus 2,000 power to your leader is very, very painful in a lot of ways. Or so you would think. Because actually, Law is a deck that, like Red Zoro, doesn't really mind if the opponent hits into your leader because you're just trying to get enough attacks on the board to finish out the game before the opponent can finish you off. As there aren't that many aggressive leaders in the game, you don't really have the worry of actually being raced, and in these more aggressive matchups, generally the opponent won't be taking out your board anyways. Still, going down to 3,000 power isn't actually too detrimental because at most the opponent only has maybe 1 or 2 hits, and a lot of times you'll just gladly take these hits because that's going to be more fuel and more cards, more options that you can actually play onto the board and use as attackers. Red Law as a deck makes his aggression by playing down these 1-cost characters and making their power 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 with these higher power cards, and therefore if he doesn't find timings to play down these 1-costs, then he doesn't have the extra damage and the benefit of actually having his leader effect. Therefore, things like the 4-cost Kid is really nice within this deck, just to make sure that you can play a character while also playing out smaller characters that are going to become attackers later on, when you inevitably play something like the 7-cost Zoro, which is going to let you hit for 8,000 thanks to both the rush from the Zoro as well as your leader effect, but also, of course, the boss monster in this deck, the 9-cost Law, being able to hit for 10,000 twice with your leader effect. Still, interestingly, this Law actually does have another effect, and that is that if you were to trash 2 cards, then you can make your leader effectively 10,000 power for this one battle. What this means is you can just turn 2 bricks in your hand into a little bit of extra defense, effectively turning it into 2,500 counter each. So you can potentially sell a little bit of time at the end to just make enough time for you to break through with your attacks on the turn afterwards. Still, while Red Law can do a lot of really explosive and powerful things, this isn't necessarily going to be enough, at least in my opinion, to actually make him a big meta threat. Unfortunately, just because he is a mono red leader, that also brings the heavy baggage of being a mono red leader, and that is decent amount of aggression, but not very many ways to actually play the long game. As such, once this deck runs out of resources, it's just going to be GG. And while you do have some really nice cards like the 1-cost Basil Huckins and the new 1-cost Luffy, this filtering through your deck isn't actually going to increase your hand size, it's just going to make a little bit more damage that will inevitably fizzle out once you run out of attacks. And so as fun as this deck is, unfortunately, I don't think that it's going to be meta relevant, at least quite yet, but just having very good typing in being Supernova as well as just being called Law has some sort of aura to it that Bandai always really likes to favor. So while this deck may not be very good right now, I have hopes that they're going to make it much better as time goes on, just because of the generic usability of Supernova typing. And so now that we've talked about all of the leaders, let's start to wrap up and talk about what might actually be the best leaders in OP14. Despite OP14 being 4 weeks old already, it doesn't feel like it's been solved at all, as things like Bonnie, Blue-Purple Luffy, and even Blue-Purple Sanji have had very strong showings in championships. It's for this reason that it's very hard for me to actually make a tier list and tell you what the definitive best decks in the format are, but if I were to put my finger on one of them, I would have to say that the best deck in the format is Moria, best deck in format. Okay, oh, sorry about that once again. The best deck, in my honest opinion, is unfortunately going to be that it's still going to be Ace and Ema at the top. While this may feel very disappointing for people who are excited for a refresh in OP14, I honestly think that OP14 does provide this. While Ace and Ema, in my opinion, are still the 2 best decks, I don't think that it's the same as OP13 where no other decks can really contest them. The reason why I think that Ace and Emo are the best decks is not because they're infallible, but just because when you look at all of the matchup as a whole, they still have the best matchup spread. While Ace and Emo used to only need to worry about each other and the mirror, now they have to worry about a lot more decks. Emo needs to worry about decks like Mihawk, and Ace needs to worry about some decks like Hancock. And in this way, all of the top tier decks have received about an equal number of bad matchups. So while the tier list hasn't necessarily changed, the overall power level, or at least the discrepancy between the top decks and those that are not, have, in my opinion, shrunken. So while I do say that Ace and Emo are the 2 best decks, I do feel like any one of the new leaders is actually viable, and we've kind of returned to a jungle meta where there are still a couple of decks that feel like they are a little bit stronger than the other ones, which honestly in every meta that we've had has always been the case. So for people who prefer more jungly metas, I think that you're going to enjoy OP14 despite the fact that I believe that Ace and Emo are still the top decks, and honestly because there's so many more decks within the meta, and a lot of them suffer against green decks, Green Bonnie is another one of those decks that, although it's been coped at the start of every single set, I think for the first time is actually very, very good. OP14 is nowhere near solved, and while in OP13 I could really only make one meta breakdown as well as one meta primer, I think that in OP14 there's still a lot of room for the meta to change, evolve, and grow. So it'll be very exciting to see exactly how the meta is going to change from here until the end of OP14, and of course, how it's going to change for you when you get EB04, because there are a lot of very interesting cards in that as well. If you didn't see, I did make a video talking about some of the EB04 reveals that were revealed at Dusseldorf, so make sure to check that out. I did actually want to talk about some other decks like Sanji and Red Green Luffy, but just because of how long this video has already been, I decided that maybe it's better to just put that into another video. So if you're interested in that content, make sure to hit the subscribe button, because even if you don't use your subscription feed, it'll help indicate to YouTube that you like this content, and therefore it'll show up on your recommended more. And of course, it helps me out. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.